Okay, good. Okay, now I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, let's see. Can you all see my screen? It's got like 10 thumbnails on it. So we've been doing these drop-in sessions, and this is about the 8th or 9th one that we've done, and I've been preparing some tutorials for these sessions. And what I'm going to do today is provide you some instructions on drop-in for the drop-in sessions for categorized columns. So categorized columns are a way of displaying information, and they kind of look like. Let me just wait for this to come up here. Okay, they kind of look like this. Okay, this is a way of displaying some data as opposed to appearing in a scatter plot or other types of charts. So let me go back to my first step here. Just clearing something off of here.
Yep, and I just opened the breakout room, so I'll jump over there.
Okay, so a lot of times when we access a flow, what we like to do is we like to do a splash screen here at the beginning that kind of describes the subject of the presentation and also shows a flurry of dots, and where each dot is a record in a CSV file that's important to this particular topic. So this is categorized columns, and what I've got here is a data set that has sales broken out by salesperson, product, and month. And I'm just going to come over here on this edit underneath the definition of swarm one. I'm going to click on edit here just so I can see what the fields of my CSV file are. So pretty simple CSV file. It's only got like 7 columns. It's got a transaction ID, and this is dummy data. So it goes from 1 to 7,900 records in my data set. The months are going to flow through the entire year of 2020. So they start in January and end in December in this format. Okay. I've got 10 salespeople who are selling stuff in this demo, and I've got 5 states where people reside who are buying these things from the salespeople. And I've got 10 different products that are being sold. And in this demo, I'm assuming that usually these products, they're pretty significant products like office chairs, printers, PCs. They're sold in units. The typical it's a unit of 1 that's sold, but sometimes it's 2 and sometimes it's 3. These units or these items have prices and they have revenue associated with them. And this column over here was just something I was experimenting with. So a really simple sales history data set. So what I want to, on the first step here, what I've done is I put some queryability into these dots. So if I click on this red dot here, I see that this is transaction ID 7526. It happened in December. The salesperson was Washington. The product was a PC. There was 1 unit. It was $1,100, and the person buying it lived in the state of Florida. So these dots are all colored by product. So whenever I see a red dot, hopefully it's going to be the same product. It's a PC. Okay, and the yellow dot, this is a rug. Okay. So anyway, that's what my data looks like, and I put queryability and colorization into this very first step. The reason I did it on the first step, because I'm going to be using this throughout this presentation, and each time I add a step, I'm inheriting the information from the prior step. So here, what I'm showing here is are the sales by salesperson for the month of January. Each product has its own unique color. Okay, so here you can see all of these salespeople are selling all different products because they've got a mishmash of colors in what they're selling, and each transaction corresponds to a row in the CSV file. Now, one important thing I want to show you, let me just move something out of the way here. Okay, one important item I want to show you that has particular relevance to categorized columns is an item that is a swarm attribute. And this can either be called point by row or point per value. So point per row, which is what the vast majority of our flows usually end up being, means that there's one record in the CSV file that corresponds to each dot in the display. Okay. That's what point per row is. We will come over later toward the end of this and we'll examine what point per value is and how it can be used. Okay. So here I've got, it's a spread. It looks like, at least in the month of January, Mr. Smith was the highest performing salesperson. Mr. Johnson was the lowest performing salesperson. So I've got a filter on here that's just showing me the January records. So now I'm going to go up to my next step in this flow, which is going to contain 16 different steps by the time we're done. Okay, I'm starting to get additional height on these columns, these categorized columns of data. Okay, now I'm going to come up to May and more higher volume of sales through the month of May. And now I'm going to just do the whole year. And what we're going to see is, yikes. Okay, we've got so many dots. We got 7,900 dots in this display. And all the sales for all the salespeople are flowing off the top of the screen here. Now, what I could do is I could do some zooming out, but I have to do an extraordinary amount of zooming out in order to fit all this into the screen and still be able to read the labels at the bottom. So this is what happens sometimes when you're dealing with a very large number of dots, a very large number of records where each record is represented by one data point per row. Okay, so a huge number of points. What to do when the number of points becomes this large? Well, here's one thing you can do with it. You can do an animation that kind of illustrates how large these columns are. Okay, and by the time we go through this, I mean we're up at the top of these categorized columns, and we see that Evans is the king of the salespeople. Mr. Evans or Miss Evans, she outsold everybody else. Smith was pretty close, but everybody else was way, way down from there. So another thing you can do, remember this is a 3D space we're dealing with here. So we can look at Smith and Evans's columns here, and we can look down from above and see the corresponding columns for these other people. And even though these columns are quite far down, we can still read that this is Johnson, Perry, Bisson, Sullivan, Jones, etc. Okay, so that's one thing you can do is you can turn this to if the categorized columns are running off the top of the screen, you can kind of turn it to your advantage to show how immense maybe one or two of the columns are compared to the others. Okay. By the way, interrupt me if you got any questions as I'm going through this. Okay. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. Okay, so let me fast downward here. I'm going to go back to ground zero here. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the products. So that first slicing was by salesperson. This slicing is by product. And I'm going to see kind of the same thing happening here. So, by the time, if I'm just looking at January, I mean, this is fine. But by the time I get to looking at the entire year's sales by product, same thing is going to happen here. So, I'm taking the same approach here. I'm just gonna go up these columns and do an animation to get to the top, and I'm going to see that, wow, PCs are really where the action is at in this company. So PCs vastly outperformed everything else that this store is selling. Okay, so once again, I'm just looking down at here. Okay, so far so good. The next thing I'm going to show you is that many of these same types of things that can be accomplished with categorized columns can be also accomplished with Scatterplots. And these are relatively new additions to our product. in Scatterplot. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to focus on the swarm one on step 11. I'm highlighting the definition of swarm one on step 11 by clicking in this particular cell. And this tells me, okay, this swarm is displayed as a scatter plot. Okay, the product along the x-axis is called product. Along the height axis, which I'm not actually really using in this, I was just playing around with a field called dummy height. You can ignore that for right now. My chart is 1.5 meters high, and it's, excuse me, 1 meter high, 1.5 meters wide. So it's wider than it is high. And what I've got here is I'm using something that's only been in our product maybe for 3 or 4 months now, basically since around the beginning of the year. It's called additional dimensions. And basically it's a way of increasing the dimensionality of what we're looking at here to go beyond a typical width, height, depth kind of dimensionality. This, I'm choosing a custom dimension here, and I'm using something we call dispersion types, dispersion shapes. And the particular shape I'm using here is column. And what this allows me to do is allows me to generate the same kind of display as I was generating in my categorized columns here. So there are some attributes here that I won't go into them in much depth here right now, but one important item here is 5 points per row. That is describing this dimensionality here, where each line item in my sales ledger is a separate point in this on this chart. So 5 of these are packed into a row. I have a spacing between dots is just a small amount of spacing. That's 0.01. The alignment of this column is centered on the what we call the tick label along the x-axis. So you've got some flexibility here on how you can present that. I've chosen center. On the height axis, I've got the same spacing between the dots. And let's see, there's not too many other things to express here. You could play around with this, and we'll be putting this flow up in a place where you can get at it. You'll actually be able to do some reverse engineering in this flow here. So you can, when you get this, you can play around with it a bit and just see how different things change as you vary them. For example, let's see if I wanted to vary the points per row, and I made it 6 and 7 and 8. So what I'm doing here is I'm spreading the row wider and making the column shorter. Okay, I'm going to put it back to 5 where it was when I began all this. Okay, and notice on this chart here, I should have mentioned this when I was talking about product in the categorized columns. Each product here has its own color. So the color is driven by product, not by salesperson. So each of these items is a pure color because I just have one product that's appearing on this. So any questions about this so far? Okay, so let me go to the next step here.
I have one. Bill?
Oh,
hi.
Sure.
It's Tony Trudell here.
Hi, Tony.
Hi. So this is my first time looking at the editor, so bear with me. The 11 and 12 column that you're clicking on underneath the display, is that just what is that section? It seems like you're clicking on that and seeing something very different.
Yeah, and it's tough to come into this session because we've already laid a lot of groundwork here, but let me just pick up on that real quick. Yeah. Okay, the way you navigate in the flow editor is each step that in a flow, and I've got 16 steps in this flow. Each step can have any number of data objects resident on the step. Okay, on this particular step number 12, I have a swarm, which corresponds to a CSV file, which corresponds to each data record is a dot, okay? And on this, I also have something called labels. A label can be applied to a swarm, and that's what's causing these items to appear on the top of my columns here. So this is a label setting. Okay, and if I continue down here further, I can see a bunch of blue objects. These are text objects. So this particular text object was the last one I put in here, and that is this object right here, the text that says you have more control over settings when you use a scatter plot.
Okay.
So this particular step on this particular flow only has 3 data objects on it: a swarm, some labels, and text. So, and you know, sometimes you'll have a step that can have 10 items on it, you know, a bunch of images, text, multiple swarms, a map, you know, all these kinds of things can go in it. Did that answer your question, Tony?
Yeah, to an extent. I'm still very new at seeing flow in action. So I understand that you've got a series of steps that you may be able to animate or cycle through in showing this to someone, and that these are those steps, kind of as you're showing us and demonstrating. Yep.
Yep, that is correct.
Okay.
Let's see, and the other important thing to know about the flow editor is you navigate the data objects down here in what we call the data objects timeline. And when you click on an object here, the definition of that object appears in the right-hand pane. So I'm clicking on Swarm 1 for step 10 or step 12. That's a scatter plot with all the attributes that I just described a little while ago. If I just took a look at the labels that are associated with that, this is a simpler data item, and this is saying, hey, I want these labels put onto Swarm 1 when the value of the transaction ID is the maximum value for the product. So that means I'm putting these labels right above the last transaction for these products, which means, hey, put them at the top of the column. So, and we've got a fair amount of flexibility where these labels can be placed. Okay, so what I've done, let me back up one step here. We were on this step here, and then I made a transition from step 11 to step 12. So you see an animation here, which will probably be a little jumpy over Zoom, but you probably picked up on it. So this particular step here, all I've done here is I have compressed the number of rows, or I've widened the columns, so these are 10 dots in width. And I've also, I think on this step, I've also decreased I put in an attribute that caused me to decrease the height of the column. Let me just see here real quick. Yeah, instead of having 1 point per column, in order to kind of bring it down into the field of view here, I changed this to make it two dots. So, you know, basically that's a control I have. So if I've got something that's flowing off the top of the screen, I can bring it back down. And we have that functionality in these skyscraper scatter plots. We don't really have the exact same equivalent in the categorized columns. So some people prefer to use these scatter plots rather than categorized columns. There's some nice things you get from the categorized columns, in that by default, they're kind of arranged in a kind of a semicircular fashion. So you can get some nice effects that way. And you know, scatter plots, we don't really have quite that same kind of capability. But on scatter plots, we can also slant the labels here. Can't really do that in categorized columns. So you can get some nice effect here by you're able to take advantage of all the axis control vehicles that we have for scatter plots. Okay, let me go to the next step here. I'm going to go advance from step 12 to step 13. Oh yeah, sometimes, I mean, a lot of this presentation has had to do with a large number of dots, where some of the dots are flying off the top of the screen. And we've seen how you can turn that to your advantage sometimes. And sometimes just a horizontal display is better than a vertical display because you got more width on if you display something horizontally. And also sometimes the labels can be put in so that they just look a little bit better in a horizontal format than in a vertical format. So this is just meant to show some of the flexibility and some of the typical uses of categorized columns and their skyscraper cousins, which are additional dimensionality that's put into Scatterplots. Okay, now let me return to the very first thing I mentioned here.
Hey, Bill?
Yes.
I'm just interrupting. That's
no problem.
That's how I go. So just on this step, if one wanted to quickly reorganize this by length, right, and get the PC at the top and television second and rug third, is that something that can be quickly changed here in a setting?
Yeah, we have ways of sorting. That can be addressed either in the CSV file by sorting appropriately within the CSV file,
right?
Or a lot of our objects can be sorted on screen also.
That's kind of what I was wondering. You know, the CSV is easy enough to change, but
yeah,
I wouldn't want everything else to change on every other display I'd set up. So if you can change it in here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so yeah, we have different ways of addressing different types of sorting depending on the type of charts you have.
Thank
like
you.
and going back to one of these steps here, actually, let me just go back to the beginning here. I think on one of these steps, all I did was in going from one step to the next, all I did was sort it. Let me just check here. Maybe it was in the products. Yeah, let me fast forward here to the products here. Yeah, so I think in going from this step, I had cabinet, desk, dryer, office chair, PC. I think in going to the next step, yeah, I resorted it according to the height or according to
right.
the volume here. And the way I did that, if I take a look at this definition of this swarm over here, let's see, where I'm talking about the categorized columns, I invoked a sort here, sort by the count of items within column product in ascending order. So that's the kind of logic I did to go from what my initial ordering was, which was dictated by the order in the CSV file, to getting it in the order of increasing sales.
Great, thanks.
Okay, let me come back to step 13. This is where we were. I'm now going to go to step 14. I am returning to categorized columns. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at some data that's been aggregated by us. It's been aggregated by salesperson and by product, I think. Let me just show you what this CSV file looks like. Remember my first CSV file, or that was 7,900 records. Whoops, let me see. I think I clicked on the wrong thing here. Yeah, okay. When navigating the flow editor, what you want to do is you want to get your muscle memory, so you're just instinctively, reflexively, you're clicking down here before you go over here to make sure you're absolutely focused on the right cell. You know, what I had done is I had blindly forwarded to step 14, and my focus was still up on swarm 1. And that's why I couldn't find what I wanted when I first looked over here. I've done that enough times, I immediately knew what I'd done. So anyway, good muscle memory, click down here in the object's timeline, identify the cell you want to see the definition of, and then come over here. So let me show you what the CSV file looks like on this. Okay, so here I've gone through an aggregation by salesperson here. So I've got all my sales for Bisson, Evans, Jefferson, etc. All of these sales, these are the units total that they sold. These are the revenue total for the entire year. So this is an aggregated data set, not a point-by-point data set. And what I've got here in my definition here for this swarm, I've still got it at point per row. So that's why I'm seeing this weird display here. Flow is telling me exactly what I'm asking it to do. I'm asking it to display point per row, how many points in the data file belong to each of these salespeople. And since this is an aggregated data set, I only have 1 point for each salesperson. So using point per row here gives me a nonsensical step. Okay. But however, if I go over to the next step where I'm using point per value, let me focus on that swarm. Now I'm creating this using a point per value. And point per row and point per value is a swarm characteristic. You cannot have a swarm that deals both in point per row and point per value visualizations. You gotta have separate swarms if you want to even have the same kind of data. Okay. So I'm using an aggregated data set for the salesperson data. And what I'm doing here is I'm using point per value. Now, let me tell you what that is. So I'm going to generate a point here, and I'm looking at the revenue total column in my data set, and I'm generating a separate point for every $2,200 of revenue in that data set. So if I come in here and I take a look at this data set again, I have $376,700. That's how much was generated by Bisson. Divide that by 2,200, and you're going to get the number of dots that are going to be in Bisson's display in this point per value categorized column display. Okay, so if you count up all these values, multiply by 20. If you count the dots, multiply by 2,200, you're going to get 376,700. So this is a very, very useful way of displaying aggregated data. Okay, and the nice thing about this gets completely around the issue where I had earlier in this presentation where I was running off the top of the screen. Because if I'm ever running off the top of the screen, all I need to do is just change this to a higher value. Okay, so if I change this back to 100 instead of 2,200, yeah, all of a sudden I'm way off the top of the screen again. I'm back to having to contrive an animation that shows how much higher Washington was than everybody else or whatever. So if I make this 2,200, which I just experimented with a little bit, it kind of gave me the right form factor that I wanted to have in displaying this chart on the screen. So point per value, very, very great way of using either scatter or using categorized columns here to display certain data. Okay, now here, I don't know if you, I haven't really put a lot of curvature into the way I've defined these categorized columns, but I could get this into a shape where it's kind of a semicircular arc, which would be very effective for some types of presentations. Okay, so that is, I'm using point per value to generate a categorized column by salesperson. And I think in this last step, I did exactly the same thing here, but it's by product. Yeah, and this shows us what we saw before. PCs really dominated. It dominated the sales of this particular organization, and televisions were in second place, but way behind PCs. So let me see it. On this one, I think I have a slight curvature here. It's not much, but anyway, so this is using point per value, and on this one, I'm using a different data set where I've aggregated the data by product instead of aggregating it by salesperson. I've aggregated the data here by product, and here you can see that PC with $2 million in sales is way above everything else, which is what the chart shows too. And that's, I think that's about all I really prepared for categorized columns for this discussion. At this point in these presentations, we just open it up for questions either on this topic or any other topic. And depending on the group, I mean, these questions and answer sessions go in interesting directions. So let me open it up, and between Michael, Sierra, and myself, we'll answer any questions that you throw at us. And Jason Marsh, our CEO, just came into the meeting too. So you got a good group here. Any questions from anybody?
Tony has some questions.
Well,
Yeah,
we'll have some. If you don't have questions, we'll have some answers.
I've got some. I do want to respect the other people on the call who've joined and haven't spoken. So I'll delay my questions just for another second or two. Anybody? Okay. Thank you very much for that, Bill. It's interesting to see how to work with Flow. I'm coming to this call more trying to figure out how to integrate the output of Flow into integrate it with different technologies or into my classroom. I teach math. I'm a VR enthusiast. I have a studio that's all around about showcasing what's happening in VR and showcasing it to a wider audience. And so I work with educators in VR and a lot of other spaces, but I've never actually seen Flow. I've heard of Flow being brought into the VR space, but I don't know how to do that. I never experienced a Flow demonstration in a VR space. Perhaps one of you on the call was involved with that. But that's really what I want to do, get some of these animations, clearly I could record going through the steps here. Yeah. And then just throw a video into Frame VR or something, and someone could just watch the video. But I really want someone to be able to click through some steps and watch it themselves. Or I want them to be surrounded by these columns that go up into space, and I maybe it's wishful thinking, maybe Flow's not there yet. There's a headset. I could pull mine out too. Tell me what I want to hear.
Okay, yeah. Let me just ask you one question, Tony. What educational institution are you involved with?
I'm with higher ed. I'm at North Highland College in Comox, British Columbia.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah,
okay.
I teach math upgrading,
Yeah.
but I'm a VR champion for any discipline.
Okay, well, let's let one of the other three people on this call from Flow answer your question. Which one of you folks wants to answer Tony's question?
I'll start. Let Michael jump in. You can stop sharing your screen if you want for the moment. So hi, yeah, Flow actually was founded almost 6 years ago as a VR company. That's what we live, breathe, thought we were going to do. And for about 4 years, we kind of starved to death. The VR winter was strong and it was real. And we started focusing much more on our flat screen and actually more of our marketing on our flat screen. But it still works beautifully. And go to the Oculus browser and just go to our URL, a.flow.gl, click through the featured flows. It works. It's really quite an amazing experience. I love how it works in VR. Michael's about to show you what it looks like in a HoloLens. And of course, there's the augmented reality on phones. If you haven't seen that yet, Michael's TikToks are a good example of that. We're pretty deep in the metaverse, and we're excited that the rest of the world might be catching up. And we're excited to be able to jump back into that space and be able to talk about it a lot more without just turning off some of our more enterprise-focused customers.
Fair enough. So I'm hearing that's interesting about the AR application. I like the 2D application, if only for accessibility.
Yeah.
But if I'm understanding you correctly, that's you access these flows through that interface, like adding it to Frame VR, for example, as an asset. I don't know how familiar you are with that platform, as a video asset or something like that. That's not or adding it to Engage or Altspace. Like you can't just add a flow somewhere. You got to go to the Flow app and experience it that way. Yes.
Correct.
Someday we're really interested in doing that, but we optimize for the web first.
Yep.
And that a lot of these other environments, for good reason, right? For security and other reason, they don't want full scripting languages running inside of those environments. So over time, we'll probably be there, but for now, no, we don't play as nice with all the other environments as we would like.
Yeah.
Totally understandable and just good to know. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And if I could interject just for a second here, I think this is something I want to show people, one from the AR VR perspective, just to give you a little bit of that sense, but then also for this category, because I think this is an interesting example where point per value and point per row are actually intermixing. So I'll elaborate on that in just a minute. But I put a link in the chat window, or if you have your phone handy, you can scan this QR code. I'm also wearing a HoloLens device. And so this is my view from the camera. And one thing that's kind of cool is that if I get close to the QR code, it actually will come up as this like play button. And so now when I click the play button, what this will do is open up basically a browser to look at that link. And that might take just a bit to load. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is mostly focus just on the flat screen version here, but let me try one last time. It's a little, there we go. So we see that.
I hate to say it, but the HoloLens is kind of an old device.
Okay, there we go.
Powered, and it's a little.
Now it's opening the web link. Okay, there we go. But yeah, this is a multi-user environment. So, we can all be in here. So yes, while the future, Tony, is definitely in the sense that we want to plug in to all other platforms. We don't necessarily want to be our own domain or place. This idea of being in Zoom, but then also having some people in headsets, some people on phones, cross devices. We've actually hosted a live Clubhouse event where people will use the audio in Clubhouse, and then other people were joining on their phone, on their computer, as well as on headsets. And so let me actually join this meeting now on headset here as well. And I'll just progress through this presentation real quick because it is relevant to this, where this is actually some of the results of a TikTok survey where 47,000 people responded. And what's unique about this is typically we would show this as point per value, because you get some, aggregate view that says, 47,000 people responded, and here's the percentage of each of these categories. But when we start to plot it as each row is a thing, each row is a place, that what you can start to do is start to show movements of these dots, and it starts to come into focus in a different way. And so it's something I'm sort of big into experimenting lately, and I'm going to jump into XR now because all right, cool. So now you should be able to see my HoloLens video. I'm not sure how stable that is, but do you see myself in the scene?
Yep, more or less. Yep.
Okay, yeah. And so I can make that big, but yeah, so here I am in a multi-user environment. And sorry, where'd my HoloLens go? There it is. Okay, let me make that so you couldn't quite see it. So I'm in the HoloLens in my room. And so I guess you weren't quite seeing me scan the QR code, so apologies, but yeah, so I'm in the scene now, and that's how I can join from this device as well as from a computer, and we're in the meeting together. So I see
right, and so that's the
sticks over there, and
that's the AR display. Like you're seeing that hover above, in front of your desk, in front of your monitor.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So kind of a fun little thing, and so in many ways, this is what you could do for categorical variables, for more like histogram bins. Anyways, this is something I think is kind of interesting, where seeing the true quantity of respondents and that each person is actually a dot does carry some weights, and that you can build some pretty interesting visualizations from that. So just one thought that's related to sort of this topic, but also just an excuse to show you what this looks like in XR.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Anybody else have any other questions?
Hey, Bill,
Okay.
I just want to jump in here. It's not a question. I just want to give a shout out to Tony. And I'm also an educator. I teach high school math and design, and I've been, working with these guys on Flow for a little while. I think this is a lot of potentials. We use this in the educational environment. Maybe you and I can have a sidebar, after this and just exchange information if we can, collaborate on this a little bit, both VR and AR and in terms of using this in education. And yeah.
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn, Hal, or maybe put your contact info in the chat, and I'll send you an email.
Sounds good.
Good connection.
Community,
like
love
that.
it.
Yeah, so Sierra and Michael and Jason, what answers do we have that we wanted to share today that are not accompanied by a lead-in question? Anything in particular?
Oh, I have my my why question. I like to talk about how I might have already heard it, but it's really easy to look at this and say, oh, that's cool. And so my question is, what is cool? And is this just cool, or is it just fun and games, or is this actually really meaningful? So I have my own definition of cool, which is that cool is a sense of mastery and control. Think about a great skateboard trick where, someone can they totally have control over the board and over the gravity, and it's just cool. They master that. Or even Iron Man flicking his atoms in order to create a new element, right, in augmented reality space. So what we do is to try to give people that sense of mastery and control. I mean, that's why it's called flow. It's that accomplishing something difficult and having all the tools and everything you need in order to have that sense of purpose and mastery. And so, yeah, what we do is cool, but really it's about efficiency. It's about better ways to get ideas into your audience's head where they can use it to make better data-driven decisions. So that's usually a question that I like to have people set up for me is, what is cool, and is this just cool?
Yep, thank you for that, Jason. Michael, do you have one final answer you want to give, or Sierra, one final answer you want to give to an unstated question?
Yeah, so no one asked, but I'm just going to be like doing a marathon for the next couple of weeks of just building constantly and just sharing the whole process live and making mistakes and all that. So hope you're just ready for that. And if you want to learn along the way, I'll be there. No one asked, but I'm here for you guys and really want you guys to succeed. So we've seen a lot of amazing responses in the world, and really excited to get others the ability to really tell these data stories and reach a really large audience.
And Sierra, what's your global answer to an unasked question?
I'm just going to share kind of the answer to all of the questions that maybe anyone would have. On Flow, if you go to our documentation tab, that'll take you to our help center. So if you have any questions, about the editor or building things in the future, you can come here, search for like how to build a map. And then different articles will come up. But there's also a link to our videos, which has all of our past trainings that we've done. And if you can't find it, you can always submit a request and reach out to us directly. And if you have any bugs or, questions about how to build something, we'll get back to you there.
Okay, and my final answer is, yeah, we love to hear from you guys. And we love to see the flows that you're building. And if you ever want us to take a look at a flow that you've constructed, to give you some feedback or commentary, you can reach us. I'm Bill at flow.gl, Bill at flowgl. Yeah, we get taken up on that offer quite often, and it's thrilling to us to see the types of flows that people are generating all around the world. And we usually have some interesting insights that we can pass along to somebody who shares the flow with us and asks for commentary. So happy to do it, and look forward to getting some visibility into the flows that you folks create. Okay, I guess that's about it. And any final questions?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question, guys. I mean, I think it is really cool what you guys are doing. I think I'm on the other end of that spectrum as it relates to the educators, right? So I actually work for a global software company. We are specialized in doing SaaS around hybrid cloud. What I actually stumbled onto Michael's TikTok, and a lot of what we are doing today is very complex in terms of telling complex stories of how cloud adoption and enablement for enterprise corporations, and walking them from a legacy traditional infrastructure into what our vision of the world is and today. So I don't know that I have any, I don't have any flows to share, but definitely open to kind of talking through, hey, here's what I see from a use case perspective looks like on our side, and maybe getting some ideas and feedback for the right way to actually even build those flows, or if they would even be possible, right?
Oh, I love it. And you're approaching it right. You're thinking about the impact and metrics first, and then the flow second almost. And I think that's great. Think about what you're trying to accomplish, right? Are you trying to reach a larger audience? Are you trying to have them be more engaged? Are you trying to make sure they understand more? And I think we can definitely have levers for each of those. But you sort of optimize for different things. And I think it's crazy to say, but like, if you told me a couple of years back that like me posting stuff on TikTok would like somehow lead people to flow, I would have called you crazy. But that you sort of learn along the way, and yeah. So all that said, I think we'd love to explore the use case. Can definitely shed some light on what we've seen. But yeah, I love how you're thinking of it.
Cal, whereabouts are you located?
So I'm just out of Wisconsin. I'm part of the Nutanix enterprise team in Wisconsin. So a lot of my presentations and my target market audience are going to be, your IT leadership, business leadership, C-suite type conversations. I cover the Lansens of the world, the Johnson Controls, and in many of those scenarios are, the PowerPoints are stale, right? And they don't tell good stories, especially when we're talking about complex digital transformation discussions where we're impacting the lives of potentially hundreds of engineering resources and their staff, and what that means in terms of their target market audience, right? You're potentially now, asking to impact thousands of people in terms of what their customer base looks like. So, and at the same time, you've got to condense it all down to a very impactful, precise story. That maybe you've got 15 minutes, 30 minutes to be able to deliver that in that C-suite discussion, right? So again, seeing some of the stuff that Micah was doing on TikTok, I'm sitting here looking at it going, that would really be, I could see the use case and it being beneficial if I could somehow adopt that to what I do on a day-to-day basis. And again, I don't have a flow to share per se, but that's really where I'm doing my research and wanted to see what's behind the curtains a little bit, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, with SaaS, we know you've got data, and there's stories in that data, so you've come to the right place.
You got it.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, let's exchange some emails, Cal, and we can set up a time when we can get together.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love it.
Okay, terrific. I guess this is the final call for any remaining question. Okay. Well, with that, thank all of you very much for joining us on this session. We'll see you at some other session if you want to attend. We put on a couple sessions like this each week. There's always a new topic, and eventually we will have exhausted 30 or 40 topics, and we'll start recycling through the topics. So have a good rest of the evening or morning, wherever you're located.
Good stuff, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.